This is part 28 of Good Omens. Aziraphale was dithering. He'd been dithering for some 12 hours. His nerves, he would have said, were all over the place. He walked around the shop, picking up bits of paper and dropping them again, fiddling with pens. He ought to tell Crowley. No, he didn't. He wanted to tell Crowley. He ought to tell Heaven. He was an angel, after all. You had to do the right thing. It was built in. You see, a while you thought. Crowley had put his finger on it right enough. He ought to have told Heaven right from the start. But he'd known him for thousands of years. They got along. They merely understood one another. He sometimes suspected they had far more in common with one another than with their respective superiors. They both liked the world for one thing, rather than viewing it simply as the board on which the cosmic game of chess was being played. Well, of course that was it. That was the answer staring him in the face. It'd be true to the spirit of his pact with Crowley if he tipped Heaven the wink, and then they could quietly do something about the child, although nothing too bad, of course, because we are all God's creatures. When you come down to it, even people like Crowley and the Antichrist, and the world would be saved, and there wouldn't have to be all that Armageddon business, which would do nobody any good anyway, because everyone knew Heaven would win in the end, and Crowley would be bound to understand. Yes, and then everything would be all right. There was a knock at the shop door. Despite the closed sign, he ignored it. Getting in touch with Heaven for two-way communications was far more difficult for Aziraphale than it is for humans, who don't expect an answer and in nearly all cases would be rather surprised to get one. He pushed aside the paper-laden desk and rolled up the threadbare bookshop carpet. There was a small circle chalked on the floorboards underneath, surrounded by suitable passages from the Kalibah. The angel lit 7 candles, which he placed ritually at certain points around the circle. Then he lit some incense, which was not necessary, but did make the place smell nice. And then he stood in the circle and said the words. Nothing happened. He said the words again. Eventually, a bright blue shaft of light shot down from the ceiling and filled the circle. A well-educated voice said, "Well, it's me, Aziraphale." "We know," said the voice. "I've got great news. I've located the Antichrist. I can give you his address and everything." There was a pause. The blue light flickered. "Well," said again. "But you see, you can stop all it happening in the nick of time. You've only got a few hours. You can stop it all, and there needn't be the war, and everyone will be saved." He beamed madly into the light. "Yes," said the voice. "Yes, he's in a place called Lower Tadfield, and the address—" "Well done," said the voice in flat, dead tones. "There doesn't have to be any of that business with 1/3 of the seas turning to blood or anything," said Aziraphale happily. When it came, the voice sounded slightly annoyed. "Why not?" it said. Aziraphale felt an icy pit opening under his enthusiasm and tried to pretend it wasn't happening. He plunged on. "We can simply make sure that we will win, Aziraphale." "Yes, but the forces of darkness must be beaten. You seem to be under a misapprehension. The point is not to avoid the war, it is to win it. We have been waiting a long time, Aziraphale." Aziraphale felt the coldness envelop his mind. He opened his mouth to say, "Do you think perhaps it would be a good idea not to hold the war on Earth?" and changed his mind. "I see," he said grimly. There was a scraping near the door, and if Aziraphale had been looking in that direction, he would have seen a battered felt hat trying to peer over the fanlight. "This is not to say you have not performed well," said the voice. "You will receive a commendation. Well done." "Thank you," said Aziraphale. The bitterness in his voice would have soured milk. "I'd forgotten about inevitability, honestly." "We thought you had." "May I ask," said the angel, "to who I have been speaking?" The voice said, "We are the Metatron," the voice of God, but not the voice of God, an entity in its own right, rather like a presidential spokesman. "Oh, yes, of course. Oh, well, thank you very much, thank you." Behind him, the letterbox tilted open, revealing a pair of eyes. "One other thing," said the voice. "You will, of course, be joining us, won't you?" "Well, of course, it has been simply ages since I've held a flaming sword," Aziraphale began. "Yes, we recall," said the voice. "You will have a lot of opportunity to relearn." "What sort of initiating event will precipitate the war?" said Aziraphale. We thought of a multinational nuclear exchange would be a nice start. Oh yes, very imaginative. Aziraphale's voice was flat and hopeless. Good, we will expect you directly then, said the voice. Ah, well, I'll just clear up a few business matters, shall I? Said Aziraphale desperately. There hardly seems to be any necessity, said the Metatron. Aziraphale drew himself up. I really feel that probity, not to say morality, demands that a reputable businessman I should— Yes, yes, said the Metatron a shade testily. Point taken. We shall await you then. The light faded but did not vanish. They're leaving the line open, Aziraphale thought. I'm not getting out of this one. Hello, he said softly. Anyone still there? There was silence. Very carefully, he stepped over the circle and crept to the telephone. He opened his notebook and dialed another number. After 4 rings, it gave a little cough, followed by a pause, and then a voice which sounded so laid back you could put a carpet on it, and it said, Hi, this is Anthony Crowley. Crowley, Aziraphale tried to hiss and shout at the same time. Listen, I haven't got much time, probably not right now, or asleep, or busy or something, but— Shut up, listen, it was in Tadfield. It's all in that book, you've got to stop. After the tone, and I'll get right back to you. Ciao. I want to talk to you now. Stop making noises. It's in Tadfield. That's what I was sensing. You must go there and— He took the phone away from his mouth. Bugger, he said. It was the first time he'd sworn in more than 6,000 years. Hold on, the demon had another line, didn't he? He was that kind of person. Aziraphale fumbled in the book, nearly dropping it on the floor. They would be getting impatient soon. He found the other number. He dialed it. It was answered almost immediately, at the same time as the shop's bell tingled gently. Crowley's voice, getting louder as he neared the mouthpiece, said, Really mean it? Hello? Crowley, it's me. No. The voice was horribly non-committal. Even in his present state, Aziraphale sensed trouble. Are you alone? He asked cautiously. No, got an old friend here. Listen. Away with ye spawn o' hell. Very slowly, Aziraphale turned around. Shadowell was trembling with excitement. He'd seen it all. He'd heard it all. He hadn't understood any of it, but he knew what people did with circles and candlesticks and incense. He knew that all right. He'd seen the devil rides out 15 times, 16 times if you included the time he'd been thrown out of the cinema for shouting his unflattering opinions of amateur witchfinder Christopher Lee. The buggers were using him. They'd been making fools out of glorious traditions o' the army. I'll have ye, ye evil bastard, he shouted, advancing like a moth-eaten avenging ale. I ken what ye be about, coming up here and seducing women to do your evil will. I think perhaps you've got the wrong shop, said Aziraphale. I'll call back later, he told the receiver and hung up. I could see what you're about, snarled Shadowell, the reflexive foam around his mouth. He was more angry than he could ever remember. Things are not what they seem, Aziraphale began, aware even as he said it, that as conversational gambits went, it lacked a certain polish. I bet they ain't, said Shadwell triumphantly. No, I mean, without taking his eyes off the angel, Shadwell shuffled backwards and grabbed the shop door, slamming it hard so that the bell jangled. Bell, he said. He grabbed the nice knocker at prophecies and thumped it down heavily on the table. Book, he snarled. He fumbled in his pocket and produced his trusty Ronson. Practically candle, he shouted, and began to advance. In his path, the circle glowed with a faint blue light. Said Aziraphale, I think it might not be a very good idea to— Shadwell wasn't listening. By the powers invested in me, by virtue o' office or witchfinder, he intoned, I charge ye quit from this place. You see the circle, and return henceforth to the place from which ye came, pausing not to. It would really be unwise for a human to set foot in it without— and deliver us free evil. Keep out of the circle, you stupid man. Never to come again to vex. Yes, yes, but please keep out of— Aziraphale ran toward Shadwell, waving his hands urgently. Returning, nay, more, Shadwell finished. He pointed a vengeful, black-nailed finger. Aziraphale looked down at his feet and swore for the second time in 5 minutes. He'd stepped into the circle. Oh, fuck, he said. There was a melodious twang, and the blue glow vanished. So did Aziraphale. 30 seconds went by. Shadwell didn't move. Then, with a trembling left hand, he reached up and carefully lowered his right hand. Hello, he said. Hello? No one answered. Shadwell shivered, then with his hand held out in front of him like a gun that he didn't dare fire and didn't know how to unload, he stepped out onto the street, letting the door slam behind him. It shook the floor. One of Aziraphale's candles fell over, spilling burning wax across the old, dry wood. Crowley's London flat was the epitome of style. It was everything that a flat should be, spacious, white, elegantly furnished, and with that designer, unlived-in look that only comes from not being lived in. This is because Crowley did not live there. It was simply a place he went back to at the end of the day when he was in London. The beds were always made, the fridge was always stocked with gourmet food that never went off. That was why Crowley had a fridge after all. And for that matter, the fridge never needed to be defrosted or even plugged in. The lounge contained a huge television, a white leather sofa, a video and a laserdisc player, and a saxophone, 2 telephones, the saxophone line, and the private line. A number so far undiscovered by the legions of telephone salesmen who persisted in trying to sell Crowley double glazing, which he already had, or life insurance, which he didn't need, and a square matte black sound system, the kind so exquisitely engineered that it just has the on-off switch and the volume control. The only sound equipment Crowley had overlooked was speakers. He'd forgotten about them. Not that it made any difference. The sound reproduction was quite perfect anyway. There was an unconnected fax machine with the intelligence of a computer and a computer with the intelligence of a retarded ant. Nevertheless, Crowley upgraded it every few months because a sleek computer was the sort of thing Crowley felt that the sort of human he tried to be would have. This one was like a Porsche with a screen. The manuals were still in their transparent wrapping, along with the standard computer warranty agreement, which said that if the machine 1 didn't work, 2 didn't do what the expensive advertisements said, 3 electrocuted the immediate neighborhood, 4 and in fact failed entirely to be inside the expensive box when you opened it. This was expressly, absolutely, implicitly, and in no event the fault or responsibility of the manufacturer. That the purchaser should consider himself lucky to be allowed to give his money to the manufacturer, and that any attempt to treat what had just been paid for as the purchaser's own property would result in the attentions of serious men with menacing briefcases and very thin watches. Crowley had been extremely impressed with the warranties offered by the computer industry, and had in fact set a bundle below to the department that drew up the immortal soul agreements with a yellow memo form attached just saying, "Learn, guys." In fact, the only thing in the flat Crowley devoted any personal attention to were the houseplants. They were huge and green and glorious, with shiny, healthy, lustrous leaves. This was because once a week, Crowley went around the flat with a green plastic plant mister, spraying the leaves and talking to the plants. He had heard about talking to plants in the early 70s on Radio 4 and thought it was an excellent idea, although talking is perhaps the wrong word for what Crowley did. What he did was put the fear of God into them. More precisely, the fear of Crowley. In addition to which, every couple of months, Crowley would pick up a plant that was growing too slowly or succumbing to leaf wilt or browning, or just didn't look quite as good as the others, and he would carry it around to all the other plants. "Say goodbye to your friend," he'd say to them. "He just couldn't cut it." Then he would leave the flat with the offending plant and return an hour or so later with a large, empty flower pot, which he would leave somewhere conspicuously around the flat. The plants were the most luxurious, verdant, and beautiful in London, also the most terrified. The lounge was lit by spotlights and white neon tubes of the kind that one casually props against a chair or a corner. The only wall decoration was a famed drawing of the cartoon for the Mona Lisa, Leonardo da Vinci's original sketch. Crowley had bought it from the artist one hot afternoon in Florence and felt it was superior to the final painting. Leonardo had felt so too. "I got her bloody smile right in the roughs," he told Crowley, sipping cold wine in the lunchtime sun. "But it went all over the place when I painted it. Her husband had a few things to say about it when I delivered it, but like I tell him, Signor del Giondo, apart from you, who's going to see it? Anyway, explain this helicopter thing again, will you?" Crowley had a bedroom and a kitchen and an office and a lounge and a toilet, each room forever clean and perfect. He had spent an uncomfortable time in each of these rooms during the long period for the end of the world. He had phoned his operatives in the Witchfinder Army again to try to get news, but his contact, Sergeant Shadwell, had just gone out, and the dim-witted receptionist seemed unable to grasp that he was willing to talk to any of the others. "Mr. Pulsifer is out too, love," she told him. "He went down to Tadville this morning on a mission." "I'll speak to anyone," Crowley had explained. "I'll tell Mr. Shadwell that," she had said, "when he gets back. Now, if you don't mind, it's one of my mornings, and I can't leave my gentleman like that for long, or I'll catch his death. And at 2, I've got Mrs. Almorod and Mr. Scroggy and young Julia coming over for a sitting, and there's the place to clean and all beforehand. But I'll give Mr. Shadwell your message." Crowley gave up. He tried to read a novel but couldn't concentrate. He tried to sort his CDs into alphabetical order but gave up when he discovered they already were in alphabetical order, as was his bookcase and his collection of soul music. He was very proud of his collection, and it had taken him ages to put together. This was real soul music. James Brown wasn't in it. Eventually he settled down on the white leather sofa and gestured on the television. "Reports are coming in," said a worried newscaster. Reports are, well, nobody seems to know what's going on, but reports available to us would seem to indicate an increase in international tensions that would have undoubtedly been viewed as impossible this time last week when, everyone seemed to be getting along so nicely, this would seem at least partly due to the spate of unusual events which have occurred over the last few days. Off the coast of Japan." "Crowley?" "Yes," admitted Crowley. "What the hell is going on, Crowley? What exactly have you been doing?" "How do you mean?" Crowley asked, although he already knew. "The boy called Warlock. We have brought him to the fields of Megiddo. The dog is not with him. The child knows nothing of the Great War. He is not our master's son." "Ah," said Crowley. "Is that all you can say, Crowley? Our troops are assembled. The 4 beasts have begun to ride, but where are they riding to? Something has gone wrong, Crowley, and it is your responsibility, and in all probability your fault. We trust you have a perfectly reasonable explanation for all this." "Oh, yes," agreed Crowley readily. "Perfectly reasonable." "Because you are going to have the chance to explain it all to us. You are going to have all the time there is to explain, and we will listen with great interest to everything you have to say. And your conversation and the circumstances that will accompany it will provide a source of entertainment and pleasure for all the damned of hell, Crowley. Because no matter how racked with torment, no matter what agonies the lowest of the damned are suffering, Crowley, you will have it worse." With a gesture, Crowley turned the set off. The dull gray screen continued enunciating. The silence formed itself into words. "And do not even think about trying to escape us, Crowley. There is no escape. Stay where you are. You will be collected." Crowley went to the window and looked out. Something black and car-shaped was moving slowly down the street towards him. It was car-shaped enough to fool the casual observer. Crowley, who was observing very carefully, noticed that not only were the wheels not going round, but they weren't even attached to the car. It was slowing down as it passed each house. Crowley assumed that the car's passengers, neither of them would be driving, neither of them knew how, were peering out at the house numbers. They had a little time. Crowley went into the kitchen and got a plastic bucket from under the sink. Then he went back into the lounge. The infernal authorities had ceased communicating. Crowley turned the television to the wall just in case. He looked over to the Mona Lisa. Crowley lifted the picture down from the wall, revealing a safe. It was not a wall safe. It had been bought from a company that specialized in servicing the nuclear industry. He unlocked it, revealing an inner door with a dial thimble lock. He spun the dial. 4004 was the code, easy to remember, the year he had slithered onto the stupid, marvelous planet, black when it was gleaming and new. Inside the safe were a thermos flask, 2 heavy PVC gloves, of the kind that covered one entire arms and some thongs. Crowley paused. He eyed the flask nervously. There was a crash from downstairs. That had been the front door. He pulled on the gloves and gingerly took the flask and the tongs and the bucket, and as an afterthought, he grabbed the plant mister from behind a luxuriant rubber plant and headed for his office, walking like a man carrying a thermos flask full of something that might cause, if he dropped it, or even thought about dropping it, the kind of explosion that impels graybeards to make statements like, And where this crater is now, once stood the city of Washington. Oh, Washington, but Washington in SFB movies. He watched his office, nudged open the door with his shoulder. Oh my lord. Then he bent his legs and slowly put things down on the floor. Bucket, tongs, plant mister, and finally, deliberately, the flask. A bead of sweat began to form on Crowley's forehead and trickled down into one eye. He flicked it away. Then, with care and deliberation, he used the tongs to unscrew the top of the flask. Carefully. That was it. A pounding on the stairs below him and a muffled scream. That would have been the little old lady on the floor below. He could not afford to rush. He gripped the flask with the tongs, and taking care not to spill the tiniest drop, he poured the contents into the plastic bucket. One false move was all it would take. There. Then he opened the office door about 6 inches and placed the bucket on top. He used the tongs to replace the top of the flask, then crashed from his outer hallway, pulled off the PVC gloves, picked up the plant mister, and settled himself behind his desk. Crowley called a guttural voice, Hosta. He's through there, hissed another voice. I can feel the slimy little creep. Liger. Hoster and Liger. Now, as Crowley would be the first to protest, most demons weren't deep down evil. In the great cosmic game, they felt they occupied the same position as tax inspectors, doing an unpopular job maybe, but essential to the overall operation of the whole thing. If it came to that, some angels weren't paragons of virtue. Crowley had met one or two who, when it came to righteously smiting the ungodly, smote a good deal harder than was strictly necessary. On the whole, everyone had a job to do and just did it. And on the other hand, you got people like Liger and Hester, who took such a dark delight in unpleasantness, you might even have mistaken them for human. Crowley leaned back in his executive chair. He forced himself to relax and failed appallingly. In here, people, he called. We want a word with you, said Liger, in a tone of voice intended to imply that word was synonymous with horrifically painful eternity, and the squat demon pushed open the office door. The bucket teetered, then fell neatly on Liger's head. Drop a lump of sodium in water. Watch it flame and burn and spin around crazily, flaring and sputtering. This was like that, just nastier. The demon peeled and flared and flickered. Oily brown smoke oozed from it, and it screamed and it screamed and it screamed. Then it crumpled, folded in on itself, and what was left lay glistening on the burnt and blackened circles of the carpet, looking like a handful of mashed slugs. Hi, said Crowley to Hester, who had been walking behind Liger, and had unfortunately not been so much as splashed. There are some things that are unthinkable. There are some depths that even demons would believe other demons, that not even other demons. There are some things that are unthinkable. There are some depths that not even demons would believe other demons would stoop to. Holy water, you bastard, said Hosta. You complete bastard. You hadn't never done anything to you. Yet, corrected Crowley, who felt a little more comfortable now that odds were closer to even. Closer, but not yet even. Not by a long shot. Hoster was Duke of Hell. Crowley wasn't even a local counselor. Your fate will be whispered by mothers in dark places to frighten their young, said Hosta, and then felt that the language of hell wasn't up to the job. You're going to get taken to the bloody cleaners, pal, he added. Crowley raised the green plastic plant mister and sloshed it around threateningly. Go away, he said. He heard the phone downstairs ringing 4 times, and then the phone caught it. He wondered vaguely who it was. You don't frighten me, said Hosta. He watched a drip of water leak from the nozzle and slide slowly down the side of the plastic container toward Crowley's hand. Do you know what this is? Asked Crowley. This is a Sainsbury plant mister, cheapest and most efficient plant mister in the world. It can squirt a fine spray of water into the air. Do I need to tell you what's in it? It can turn you into that. He pointed to the mess on the carpet. Now go away. Then the drip on the side of the plant mister reached Crowley's curled fingers and stopped. You're bluffing, said Hosta. Maybe I am, said Crowley in a tone of voice which he hoped made it quite clear that bluffing was the last thing on his mind. And maybe I'm not. Do you feel lucky? Hosta gestured, and the plastic bowl dissolved like rice paper, spilling water all over Crowley's desk and all over Crowley's suit. Yes, said Hosta. Then he smiled. His teeth were too sharp, and his tongue flickered between them. Do you? Crowley said nothing. Plan A had worked. Plan B had failed. Everything depended on Plan C, and there was one drawback to this. He had only ever planned as far as B. So, hissed Hosta, time to go, Crowley. I think there's something you ought to know, said Crowley, stalling for time. And that is, smiled Hosta. Then the phone on Crowley's desk rang. He picked it up and warned Hosta. Don't move, there's something very important you should know, and I really mean it. Hello? Nah, said Crowley. Then he said, Nah, I got an old friend here. Aziraphale hung up on him. Crowley wondered what he had wanted. And suddenly Plan C was there in his head. He didn't replace the handset on the receiver. Instead, he said, Okay, Hosta, you passed the test. You're going to stop playing with the big boys. Have you gone mad? Nope, don't you understand? This was a test. The Lords of Hell had to know that you were trustworthy before we gave you command of the Legion of the Damned in the war ahead. Crowley, you are lying, or you are insane, or possibly you are both, said Hosta, but his certainty was shaken. Just for a moment he had entertained the possibility. That was where Crowley had got him. It was just possible that Hell was testing him, that Crowley was more than he seemed. Hosta was paranoid, which was simply a sensible and well-adjusted reaction to living in Hell, where they really were all out to get you. Crowley began to dial a number. It's okay, Duke Hosta. I wouldn't expect you to believe it from me, he admitted. But why don't we talk to the Dark Council? I'm sure they can convince you. The number he had dialed clicked and started to ring. So long, sucker, he said and vanished. In a tiny fraction of a second, Hosta was gone as well.